Thank you. Bit of a hard act to follow. With Queensland brother, just down the road. But first of all, I'd like to as well just say thank you for inviting me here, and I want to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land which we meet on, and acknowledge the elders both past and present. And as Dean mentioned, the elders of Victoria, Melbourne, is probably seen by most Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people across Australia as where it all started as far as the coordinated approach for Aboriginal affairs. And and I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight. I moved down here in Victoria in 1991. It was a long time ago. I was a lot younger. And I started my working career down in Victoria, and I learnt Aboriginal affairs from a Victorian lens. And I'm pleased to say it was, again, a lot of people, some have passed on, but a number of the elders have taught me so much in how to have the patience, the courage, to be bold, but also to listen, and trying to combine them into the perfect timing is the difficult part, but teaching me that all those things combined together can provide progress. So tonight I want to just talk a little bit, and I was sitting there, I had to get goosebumps myself because I was at Uluru when that was signed and the agreement, and Dean worded it beautifully. The anticipation in the room was everyone going to agree to this statement, because there was so much, as they say, blood and sweat and tears was spilled over a long, probably close to a couple of years, and a lot of emotion was brought in, and a lot of difficult conversations were had. And we all come from different parts of Australia and had different views about what we thought was going to be the best for our people and many nations across Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. But to have one statement to represent all of us wasn't an easy task. And that day when everyone applauded was a moment which I won't forget either. So I'm going to speak a little bit about, and I've kind of taken the liberty of being a former CEO of Reconciliation Australia. I feel the things which kind of went, has been in the time frame of where we are today, and Dean has mentioned this is where we are right now, and we are wanting this to be a moment which the future generations can look back to this moment in time and say, this generation got it right and has set a very good path for where they're living now. So the word reconciliation, just a little bit of background, is when I applied for the role as to go into Reconciliation Australia, I wasn't too sure myself if reconciliation was a word that I wanted to be associated with and how did that work. So I had to explore my own motives and where I came from with that. Because usually it means two people or two groups coming together and reconciling a difference. And if you've got children, which most of you probably have had or have got, or grandchildren, sometimes it's not that easy that both of them admit that there's two parts of the wrong, and also then we can also forgive and move forward. And as an Aboriginal man growing up and seeing the members of my family and myself in a lesser degree, but seeing how the society and how the system wasn't fair, it wasn't equal. So then how do we reconcile, and how do we have this reconciliation sort of framework when there's one side that doesn't want to, that's saying that we're right, but you can come over, but we're the ones that which hold the higher ground. So I got through that, and it was quite amazing working and finding there has been so many people in this nation that wants change. Different to what the papers say, and maybe some of the shock jocks which kind of get out there and kind of, I suppose, sadly, but they seem to be the ones which clog the airspace, and people say, is that what Australia is? In my time at Reconciliation Australia, I found there was a lot of people right across this nation who want change. Aboriginal people, Torres Strait Islander people, not Aboriginal people, new arrivals, a whole range of people, old, young, from the youngest to some of our most senior, all wanting some change, but looking at what are we going to be able to get together to make that change with. So I want to do I want to go back a little bit because this is the statement and a lot of the things which was just read out tonight. We didn't team this up, but I went back through history, and I kind of grabbed pockets of where I thought were significant moments for Aboriginal people, and if I lived back in those times, I would have probably thought, yes, we've got it right, here we go, and this is a really good movement to be a part of. So in 1932, nearly 90 years ago, if my maths are right, just under 90 years ago, William Cooper, which some people may know of him, establishes the Australians Aborigines League right here in Melbourne. During the 1930s, Mr. Cooper and other leaders of the Aboriginal Progressive Association gathered close to 2,000 signatories on a petition calling on the Prime Minister Joseph Lyons and King George to intervene, and I quote, for the preservation of our race from extinction and to grant the representation to our race in the federal parliament. That was 1932, that was put to a petition to the King and to the then Prime Minister. In 1938, in the 30s, so it was pretty progressive back then. I'm sure if you lived in, no one's here may have lived in the 30s, but in the 30s it would have been a very progressive time in for Aboriginal affairs. It was kind of that it kick-started this movement. So in 1938, 6 years later, the Aboriginal Progressive Association, the same body, and the Australian Aborigines League declared 26th of January a day of mourning for Aboriginal people. Another topic which has been mentioned only, I think, last week or this week. So before there was the Australia Day on the 26th of January in 1938, because Australia Day wasn't celebrated in 1938 on the 26th of January, the Aboriginal people declared that as a day of mourning. So the connection with what's happening today and why it doesn't sit over nearly 90 years ago, 80 years ago, the Aboriginal people already declared this day as a day which we just can't sit right with us. So when the general public go, why can't we just all celebrate on this day? There is a lot of history in this. So then we moved to the 60s, and in 65, Charlie Perkins, as everyone would know Charlie, launched the Freedom Rides, which travelled throughout New South Wales, and there's some great documentary on that. But again, to draw attention to the discrimination against Aboriginal people. When you're discriminated against, you don't have a voice. When you're discriminated against, you're powerless, and you feel that you can't you can't self-determine your life when you're discriminated against. In 66, the Wave Hill Station walk-off, Lingari, when the Prime Minister poured that sand into the hands. In 1966, that was when there was a protest about poor work conditions. But more than that, it develops into Australia's first successful Australian land claim, Aboriginal land claim. In 67, which was spoken about, the referendum happened. I'm sure, and I've spoken to many people Aboriginal people who was around when that decision came out, they thought everything was going to change. That was it. They won the gold medal and it was going to be all different. And how sadly that wasn't the case. So the fight continued. In 1972, the 10 Embassy was formed. Again, why? Because our voices weren't being heard. So we're going to camp, we're going to set up 10 in front of Parliament House so we can get a voice, so we can put our, which wasn't heard. The referendum didn't deliver what we thought it was going to be. These other, the petitions weren't listened to. In 75, the Parliament passes the Racial Discrimination Act. Again, maybe this is going to have some major change. But as we know, it still hadn't worked. In 1988, which was very turbulent times, similar to, I would think, growing up, the 26th of January, is 1988 was celebrated by Australia, and it was a big year. But again, it was very much a time for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that it wasn't a year that we could celebrate, and a lot of discussions were had. But during then, the Barangarung Statement, calling for self-management and land rights, was presented to the Prime Minister Bob Hawke in 1988. And there was, and Bob Hawke came out and indicated that he was going to support a treaty in 88. Again, when we heard those words out of the Prime Minister, we finally got there. Maybe this is going to take place. Still no action. In 91, as we get a little bit closer to this day and age, there was the Royal Commission in Aboriginal Deaths and Custodies. Again, Dean mentioned the overrepresentation. In 1991, a Royal Commission was called in Deaths and Custodies. It was tabled and it was put up. Out of 330, I think so, yeah. There's 356 recommendations. There was five recommendations that were enacted or actioned. One of them was to set up Reconciliation Australia, or the Council of Reconciliation Australia in 91. Again, there was some hope that was breathed back into Aboriginal Australia, and maybe we can have some conversation and have some connection. In 92, the Mabo decision was passed through, which again was a very big landmark, and we thought there's hope. Land rights, if we think back from the very first Aboriginal land claim in '66, it took all that time before we saw another, and Mabo case was very poignant and got a lot of media coverage. Paul Keating in the same year delivers the Redfern speech and recognising the history of dispossession, violence and forced removal of Aboriginal children. So that was in 92. The most senior person in our country declares this. Still, not much action. In 95, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags were acknowledged as official flags of Australia. 97, we saw the separation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and their families when the National Inquiry came through and the Bringing Them Home report. The lady you saw up there, Pat Anderson, she was a major part of that report and uncovering what was happening with children still being removed. So then we go to 2000, so it's pretty tough, but 2000 there was that bridge walk. Remember the Sydney Harbour, then there was many other bridge walks all around Australia. For me personally, I thought, well, this is all of Australia showing they didn't care where they came from, but they wanted to show their unity to say we want to support. I remember that day particular because John Howard refused to attend it. I don't know if he didn't think it was going to be much of a turnout, but his advisor probably, definitely got that wrong. So then if we go from 2000, where we again think that there was going to be the 2000s, and this is where we lead up to now. The 2000s seemed to be this up and down. I would say one step forward, two steps back. We finally think we've got hope. We've got people that are, people that are going through the university. We're articulating, we're putting things in. Even there's more people within the political system, and we think finally we're getting somewhere. So in 2000, the bridge walk happened, and it looked, we're on the road. There's nothing's going to stop us now. We've got the nation behind us. In 2004, ATSIC, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Council, was abolished by the then Howard government. The voice of Aboriginal people was abolished, and there was no voice, a voice to government. 2006, and Dean mentioned this, Close the Gap came out, and I was a part of the health journey then and part of the Close the Gap campaign, and it was great. We thought it was fantastic that then, the new Prime Minister used it as part of his political pledge of closing the gap. He used that slogan, as some of Tom Calma said, but we said close the gap. Closing the gap, still watering it down, but that's what they went with. But we saw one of the biggest investments of finances into Aboriginal health to close that gap in 2007, again thinking that we're on the right track. 2007, Kevin Rudd delivers the apology to the stolen generations, and they were all very moving times and things where gave you goosebumps. But again, quickly, and not long after that, we saw our new body, which was our national body, the Congress of First People, was defunded in 2014. We started then moving with the Uluru Statement and maybe Constitution, and let's change the Constitution, and moving in that phase. We went through a lot of heartache and a lot of hard discussions and conversations with a lot of people. Nearly as quick as that, it was written and delivered for the Prime Minister of the day to say, no, we are not going to go down that path. And that's where we are today. We have gone through This is not a last-minute ditch effort. I know Victoria at the moment's got the treaty on the table. Treaty was mentioned by Bob Hawke in 1988. We've got this voice to the Parliament. It was mentioned in 1932. Not just mentioned, but petitioned and written to the King in 1932. So these things aren't new in our walk. You talk to the older people that have been there, and I sit there and sometimes I hear the words of saying, oh, we've heard this all before, or here they go again, another promise. And I think, come on, you got to have faith, you know, you give everyone their best chances. But as the older I get, and I'm not that old, but I've been around long enough, you do hear the Prime Ministers say the similar things. The ministers come in and they give promises, and then next minute there is no action with that. And our people still stay in the same boat, in the same area of life and disadvantage. So in our movement forward, where I see it fits, it's going to take a combination of a number of things happening all at once. You just can't provide better education and it's going to fix everything. Or let's give everyone a job, or let's make the community safer. There's a whole range of things that have to happen. And in reconciliation, we came up with these 5 dimensions, which we saw were the building blocks, and it was in the time when the Constitution was being discussed and the voice and what was going to be the next steps for our nation. But we said there needs to be these things that have to be played out. And this is just not Aboriginal people sitting around talking about. This is some of our biggest supporters across this nation saying, yeah, we think we can get this done, but we need some sort of framework. And the 5 areas which was clearly pointed out and which are based on, and I think in some of the things that we're seeing now, we're starting to hear these things. But one is, we've got to fix race relations. We've got to have a country that is free of racism. One of our board members of Reconciliation Australia painted a beautiful picture, and that's what she does. She paints, and she's one of these people, if I can say, she doesn't say hardly anything for the whole meeting, but when she does, everyone shuts up and listens to her, because it's like these pearls of wisdom just come. And we're talking about reconciliation and what we need to do, and she said where the nation was at. And she said, you know, reconciliation she goes, our nation to her is like, and she gets up on the whiteboard, and I'm a terrible artist, but she starts drawing this park and trees and the flags up there. She goes, that's what Australia is, that's where she sees Australia is. But underneath that is this toxic waste that this park's been built on. And every time there's something that goes wrong, or someone gets challenged, or Adam Goodes does the dance on the field, or someone challenges Australia about how racist we are, it explodes. It festers, it comes out. So race relations is a key part that we've got to keep working on to eliminate that. Equality and equity, which I know some of this conversation is about, how do we get that balance right? Equality and equity together. How do we ensure that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples participate equally in a range of life opportunities and unique rights of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peoples and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are recognised and upheld? Unity, which a lot with this is what we're talking about tonight, another key part to these other 2. We can't have unity if we don't get the race relations right, or where there's not an equity and equality component around unity and friendship and relationships. Institutional integrity, our institutions, that they should be able to lead this. We need leaders, and sadly our government leaders have failed us, I believe. Some of the corporate leaders are kind of trying to do this. Sometimes in Australia we lead to our sporting leaders, and sometimes they've got their own issues. But leadership in our institutions. So institutional integrity, there's integrity around the active support of reconciliation by our national political, business and community structures. And last but not least, and I always used to leave this for last, but our historical acceptance. So all Australians understand and accept the wrongs of the past and the impact of these wrongs. Australia makes amends for these wrongs of the past and ensures that these wrongs are never repeated. Sadly, the wrongs which have been done to our people, we're still living with the consequences of those. People talk about how come we can't, you know, there's overrepresentation in jails and out of home care, and that's the areas which I work in. But we've got 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation. Stolen generation is still having an effect on children today because their grandparents were stolen, and then they didn't know how to parent their parents, and then now they were in the situation. how the system is seen, and I'll take a moment just to finish off with to say that where I'm sitting with this role as the Commissioner for Aboriginal Children and Young People, and predominantly most of my work is for children that are in out-of-home care and are in the justice system. And sadly, and I hate to say it, is that a lot of the community see and the broader society see that as a deficit. I really think that we've got to turn that whole thinking around, and I think if you turn it around for our children that are in out-of-home care, our children that are just on the wrong side of making silly decisions, that they aren't a deficit, they can bring a massive value to this society, that not only our children but Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australia can bring a huge value into everything we do as Australia, and that our Australia will become a lot richer for the history which it has before Captain Cook came here, but also to be able to celebrate where people have when they've come to this country and made their life. And I've heard Noel Pearson talk about this. Many people have buried their own in these soils. These soils now are made up with the blood and the bones of many of our ancestors and our people. So it is all of our country. But the first people of this country, we need to get that story right, and we need to be able to give that voice that has been so much suppressed over 200 years, the voice to be able to guide and help be part of the Australia that it should be. Thank you.